All right, everybody, welcome to the show. We're live. Special thanks to my special guest, Dr. Josh, showing up with me. The reason that we're doing this review is because Dr. Bowen was nice enough to send me a link to this particular video earlier in the week. And between my brother and me, we've been trying to get through this. I've watched the whole thing. Dr. Josh, you said you hadn't seen it all
Yeah, this
yet.
is really the great irony of this, right? Because I sent you a link to a video that I hadn't watched.
You haven't entirely watched, yeah. But it actually does have some kind of interesting points in it. Mostly counterpoints that I think should be made. I don't know if my brother will be joining in. I don't even know. Yeah, it's 9 o'clock where he's at. I'm not sure if he might be sleeping one off. But yeah, so we're gonna jump into this a little bit. So yeah, this guy's language. I don't know if I've run into this guy before. The username was actually kind of familiar. I think I may have encountered him once in a live chat where I was on somebody, probably a theists, Christians.
I feel like I've maybe on Skylar's channel we've talked about him before.
I feel like given the attention that he pays to Old Testament stuff,
yeah,
I'm thinking that a lot of Skylar's video or his arguments would really kind of like set him off.
Yeah,
because like especially if he's going to go after Sam, stories in the book Samuel and stuff like that. This guy's kind of like he's kind of it's weird because the title to his video is misleading, understanding biblical language against angry atheists. It's like, okay, that can go a couple of different ways. I don't know. But when I started watching it, like it's weird. I don't want to give away the ending because the ending's kind of good. I don't know if we'll get to it, but he starts getting into like the first example he gets into within about 5-6 minutes here is a passage from, I think, First Chronicles, a part about Saul. Mm-hmm. And it's one that I'm familiar with from when I was younger, but I don't remember it being pivotal in any way to my skepticism. Like I was like, oh, okay. But he's like, this is the stuff you get from atheists. I'm like, is it? Like, I'm sorry, I don't know.
First Chronicles 10 is everywhere.
Yeah, it's like it said God killed Saul, and I'm like, okay, I don't really have a problem with this language here, but
I actually think that's about as far as I got in the stream, and I was like, okay, I feel like I understand where he's going.
Okay, now this makes me feel slightly worse because
I'll pass this on to Jay and Jeff and let them handle it.
Yeah, just like I'm escalating this to troublesome Christian over in that department. That's more the Spatchcock clan's territory. Like, get them, guys.
Here's Boss Haben.
Yeah. You're just sitting there like, I've got a real YouTube channel to run, but I know some atheist vultures that would love to pick your bones over this. But anyway, given that I'm perfectly happy to accept that role, but I was glad. Thank you again for coming on. So I'm going to jump into this. I'm probably going to play it at about 1.5 speed until he kind of gets into it. I think he starts making his points kind of right away. And I do kind of have some timestamps. I know like around 20 minutes, he brings up kind of a weird take. And then around 40 minutes, he gets into smiting, which has always been my favorite biblical topic, God smiting stuff, just because I love the verb. And I'm never quite sure the tenses it takes. But anyway, we'll get into that because that gets into a story in Judges that he kind of takes out of context too. So we'll get this going. Let me adjust the speed on it just from the jump. He's not particularly slow in his speech, but so if anybody has trouble kind of following along at 1.5, and even you, Dr. Josh, if you want me to slow it down, just let me know. Let's see.
Dear. All right, so tonight, basically, want to give you guys.
It also goes without saying, if anyone in the chat would like me to repeat anything or rewind, if you want me to go back a minute, post it in the live chat if you want to hear something repeated. That doesn't happen too often. Dr. Josh, as always, raise your hand or give a shout if you want me to pause it so you can put a point in. So,
a quick update about the channel and everything, what's going on. So basically, I have a new job now and going to be doing some school. So the schedule is going to be like in the debates and things like that. It comes up with
I'm just going to skip ahead
atheists and skeptics. The people that are on the fence, right? People who might be in the middle, and they're hearing the skeptic and they're hearing the Christian, and they're sitting back and saying, well, is that really how he's going to explain that? So as a believer, you want to be able to defend the scriptures properly, right? And sadly, sad to say that in the church, we don't touch on this topic, right? This is the type of questions that are common. I mean, how many times have you guys heard somebody say, well, if there is a God, then how come he allows this to happen, that to happen? If there is a God, XYZ, if there is a God, XYZ, and they ask those kind of questions, right?
Can
and
you pause it?
asking those questions is because a lot of people are not.
Yeah,
because that, again, I haven't watched like much of this, but the whole point seemed to be, does God cause directly bad things to happen? Right? That seemed to be where he was going. And it's interesting the way that he just set that up. How can there be a God that allows these things to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, he's already kind of smuggled in an interpretation of it, because it's like, it would be like, if the skeptic came to him and was like super upset, like God killed my mom, and his only comfort is, no, he just merely allowed her to die.
Oh,
oh, okay. Oh, so he's like the reluctant gunslinger. Like he could have saved my mom. He just
we're good.
Just didn't. Yeah. Like, okay. Oh, sorry, God, my B. Like, no, So yeah, he's already starting to kind of change this, and he's already kind of like, I mean, he is straw manning a little bit. I mean, this is a common thing that comes from some skeptics, but that kind of like weird twist where you automatically, that's a good catch.
But that's my point. I think is that it doesn't. Like, obviously there are things, specific passages where it's like, look, God is commanding these atrocities.
Yeah.
But that blanket thing that he's bringing up, and maybe it's just a slip of the tongue or whatever, but he's saying skeptics very often will say, how can a good God or whatever allow these things to happen? So already built into this is that the skeptic's argument that he seems to be in need of address is an all-powerful God
could intervene.
Allows. Yeah. It's not that the skeptic is saying, how can an all-loving God kill? In that argument, he's saying, how can an all-loving God allow these terrible things to happen? So anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that is a good catch, because in a lot of cases it's like, well, don't blame the God that I believe in for doing these horrible things. It's like, no, I think both sides agree that God is allowing something to happen. Like, why did my toddler develop cancer?
Yeah.
Even if it's a relatively recoverable one. Say they have what's the most common one? It's a retinoblastoma, I think is how it's pronounced. It's the one that develops in an eye, and the kid has to lose the eye, and then they're just and hopefully they don't get it in both. Usually you only get it in one. But you've got a 2 or 3 year old, 4 year old that has to lose an eye. This is this terrible thing. And so they're like, why would God take the eye of my child?
Yeah.
Like, no, he didn't take it. He just allowed sin nature to give you cancer, give your kid cancer to take it.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And that's one of those tough ones, even for a lot of believers, because if they, depending on the kind of denominational emphasis they have, if they're kind of wrestling with this idea of, an age of atonement kind of thing, then they kind of have to accept that, well, if God allows this to happen, it's sort of the sins of the father being visited on the child kind of thing. And that opens up a whole can of worms for even believers. So, but anyway, that's a tangent. So
giving them good answers, right? So tonight, what we want to touch on is we want to deal with these particular objections. A lot of it is, in the Old Testament, you see the language of God sending, sickness, or sending this or sending that. And you also see God smiting this, this or that. And so we're going to touch on the biblical language tonight, right? All right, so let's jump into it. And like I said, for some of you guys, you might not think this is a big deal, but I'm telling you, this matters. I said this matters. If you care about scripture, if you care about how you witness, this is going to matter, because these questions that you think are so simple are not being answered right? So we're going to jump into it. And so I hope that some skeptics are watching. I really do, because we don't have anything to worry about, guys. Is that once you understand the Old Testament language, right, you're going to be able to answer these type of questions, right? All right, so let's jump right into it. Understanding biblical language.
I kind of want to put a pause on that too, because he actually emphasized something weird there, and maybe he didn't intend to, but he says Old Testament language. That's going to get affected by something he brings up later on. So
it's just a weird thing to say. What does that mean? Old Testament language.
Especially, he starts off with biblical language. Then it's like, okay, this is Old Testament language. But I remember the debate that Skylar just re-aired between you, Skylar, and then the Connectleys, right?
Yeah.
And you would ask that question about a follow-up question about the use of hyperbole.
Yeah.
And like, is it the writers that are using hyperbole, or are you saying that God himself uses hyperbolic language?
Right.
And then Cliff, I think it was Cliff, the dad, goes into this thing. Well, when Jesus says chop off your hand lest your whole body burn, like, okay, so that's a yes to God using hyperbolic language, right? And he just seemed to be kind of like, I'm going to give the example, but I'm not going to commit to the position. So it's like, all right, so yeah, that effort to harmonize, I think, is just.
I just think implicit in Old Testament language is, and I suspect that he holds to this, so then it would fit. But this very fundamentalist approach to the text, which says there's like this unified voice in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
And of course, like I know of no serious biblical scholar that would, even evangelical scholar that would say that the different authors in the Hebrew Bible had different ideas and different approaches, even if they are, dealing with fundamental points. Jay Caballero and was just on Myth Vision down from the University of Texas, Austin, and he's a Near Eastern. You guys are really going to love that stream, by the way, when it comes out. It should be premiering, I think, soon. But the three of us were talking about ancient Near Eastern law and just giving an introduction to it. Jay was giving an introduction. I was helping. But this is what he does. He's writing his dissertation on criminal sexual offenses in the Hebrew Bible in the ancient Near East. And he studies under Bruce Wells, if you know that name now.
Yeah, I do know.
That's Bruce Wells' student. So he practiced criminal law as a defense attorney for 20 years before he started his PhD in ancient Near Eastern law. It's
That's
awesome. But he's an evangelical Christian. And so it was really interesting to hear what he had to say about it, because he's talking about, so these are priestly texts here in Leviticus and in Numbers, and here we have the Deuteronomist talking in the book of Deuteronomy, and it's like, I think a lot of people that are going to hear that are going to go, oh my God, how can you say there are different sources for these? Yeah. But this is the thing, and I'll shut up, but I think it's important to recognize that this is not a homogeneous text, right? You don't have this monolithic Hebrew Bible that's this one voice. And so you can talk about something like Old Testament language, because it's very broad and varied. And maybe he just means something different by it. That's entirely possible. So anyway.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency, I think this, I'm generalizing, but I think this kind of comes from more theological emphasis, especially in churches and stuff, to kind of think that the Old Testament is part one and the New Testament is the sequel that wraps things up. It's okay. And if you know any of the names that are on the screen, because he's got, I don't know.
I'm literally looking them up. I don't know them.
Okay, so he's got William Platt, W.G. Simpson, Richard Barrett, and all of them. In Hebrew style, God is said to command that which he only predicts or permits. That's kind of a weird. The predicts thing, I think, actually causes some issues. God is said to do what he permits. W.G. Simpson. Everywhere in Scripture, God is said to do what he permits. Richard Barrett. Whatever God permits may be directly attributed to him, which is what the author of Chronicles does. He's actually going to be getting into that pretty quick here.
Let's just jump right into it. I have some quotations on here from some scholars, and basically what they're going to tell you, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not big on quoting this scholar and that scholar. I'm just showing you that what I'm about to tell you is not something that is only me, right? In Hebrew style, God is said to command that which he only predicts or permits. God is said to do what he permits. Everywhere in Scripture, God is said to do what he permits. Whatever God permits may be directly attributed to him, often without noting that secondary and sinful parties were the immediate causes of the disaster. So all of these quotes right here are basically scholars simply saying.
So, I think the first three are kind of interesting. That last one from Dr. Walter C. Kaiser, that one I think is kind of interesting, because if you kind of lean into, I don't know exactly what I don't know. He seems to kind of get into the part that, like, he's this guy, and we'll see it later. He's really into making sure that people understand that it's other people doing bad things to violate the covenant, and therefore God is kind of backing away from his agreement, right? But the language in it, and one of the first couple of quotes he actually brings actually betrays this, that the writers will directly attribute this kind of misfortune to God, even though it is happening from other sources. So
I again, I get frustrated by people that do this sort of bad citation work. so you know, like someone's name, like here, they said this. Like, okay, in some instances, I think that's fine. It's not terribly useful if you're trying to use it to bolster an argument. You know, like if you're saying Abraham Lincoln once said, and then you introduce your speech or whatever, fine. But even then, it's probably good to cite it. But the only person that I know on the screen is Kaiser, and of course, Kaiser's not an unbiased. But if you read what they're saying, I wonder if they're saying what he thinks they're saying, and it's hard to know because it's impossible to know unless you can find it. And I don't know where these things are coming from, but God is said to do what he permits. Everywhere in Scripture, God is said to do what he permits.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's true, because there are, depending on the books, I think in some cases it depends on the translation into English. There's clearly that whoever translated it put the emphasis more on God allowed something to happen.
But it seems like what they're, and again, completely out of context, it's hard to know what they mean by it.
Yeah.
But I wonder if what they're saying is, you know, from like a Calvinistic standpoint, for example, when God allows something to happen, it's not that he allows it to happen outside of his control.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, that person falling from power, or that storm, that was under God's control. God, you know, even though he permitted that thing to happen, it was still him doing it, because God is sovereign and God is in control. I don't, it's hard to know what they mean by this,
and that's a good thing. That's a good spot to kind of put a pin in that, because he kind of.
But this last quote, Jeff, look, whatever God permits may be directly attributed to him, often without noting that secondary and sinful parties were the immediate causes of the disaster. So like a perfect example of that is like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, you know, through the prophets. You know, Jeremiah and his foe from the north. Like, I will bring the foe from the north. I'm about to call them down. I'm about to bring Egypt. I'm about to bring Nebuchadnezzar. Right? God's obviously not, like, a big hand isn't coming out of the sky. And grabbing a sword and, you know, striking people with it. I mean, he's utilizing very often people that he's going to then judge for what they've done. What he's commanded them to do. So it's but this is God's sovereignty. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet.
Here we go.
That in the Hebrew style, if God permitted something to happen in the Old Testament, if he permitted it, many a times the language is written as if he was the immediate cause, even though he wasn't the immediate cause. He was simply permitting it. Right now, we're going to jump into that to give examples, because it's not enough to just quote a bunch of scholars. We want to see, show me from the scriptures. Okay. So here are some examples of biblical language of the permissive, right? Very important, guys. Let's jump right into it. We're going to cover a lot. And even tonight,
I think that's the sixth time he said, let's jump right into it.
And I was wrong, because I thought he got into these points kind of quick. It's almost, what are we at? We're at like 7.5 minutes, and we're finally getting to like an actual scriptural example. So,
but let's jump right into it. Sorry, I am sure that I have those little catchphrases too. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure I say things like that also.
I want to bring up Chronicles 10, because there's actually a part in there that I kind of want to emphasize a little bit later once he does his thing. I wish I actually had like a really good. MIT has a Bible gateway. No, come on. I'll be damned, they do. Kind of. Let's see. All right, I've got that ready to go. Okay.
Promise you, you're going to learn something tonight. And sad to say, you don't see this taught in a lot of churches, right? So I promise you, if you listen with an open heart and open mind, the Holy Spirit will show you. All right, I'm telling you. All right, so let's jump into it.
He's telling us. The Holy Spirit's going to do it for you, even though the Holy Spirit was supposed to reveal itself to you as the reader, because the Bible is the Word of God and a special revelation. But you read it and your eyebrows shot up and you went to him and you're like, I got some notes about this Saul killing that happened here, just for an example. And then he's like, you know what? Let me explain it to you. And now when I explain it to you, the Holy Spirit's going to lead you to it. Like, oh, are you special revelation too?
Yeah. I mean, it's sorry. Like, it's entirely possible that this guy, his attitude does not say to me that he has like an advanced degree in biblical studies, because I feel like the higher your formal education and that stuff, the more modest you get usually. In my experience. So that doesn't sound like that. But I mean, like, this sort of attitude that all these other people, all these churches and all these, they won't tell you about this stuff, but I will, so I know it. You'll learn here.
It's sort of like, there's sort of there's a kind of salesmanship kind of quality to it, where it's like, those other dealers will treat you bad, but you get good service with me.
Right. And it might be like, he might have an advanced degree in this stuff. Like, I don't know.
It's true. Yeah.
So.
But all right, so here's an example of some biblical language of the permissive. What do I mean? 1 Chronicles 10:13. So Saul died for his transgression that he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord that he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord. Therefore, the Lord slew him. So you see that language in 1 Chronicles 10:13. If you read it, he, the Lord, slew him, slew Saul. You see that in 1 Chronicles 10:13, right? So anyone reading it, if they're a skeptic, they're going to say, see, God killed Saul. It's right there. Can't you read, Christian? It's right there. So how do you respond to that? All right, so this is what you want to show.
Is that a question that comes up a lot?
As soon as I got to this point, so I was watching this while I was working, and I was hearing stuff, and every time, I would hear these things that just reminded me of my childhood growing up in churches and stuff, and I just kind of be like, yeah, I've heard that before, yeah, whatever, and then try to make note of like, okay, that's a contradiction. That seems a little bit weird. When he gets into this, he's like, so how do you answer this? Well, I'll tell you how you answer him. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever asked a believer about this particular part. I had no issues with the language in this. Like, yeah, God killed him. So what? Like, Saul was, I mean, the whole narrative of Saul between, well, I mean, he's depicted in Chronicles and he's also depicted in Kings, right?
First Samuel,
yeah. So it's like, between the two of them, it's like you get a pretty good picture that he's not a good guy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's like, in order to understand the dynamic between, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles is a very important one. And I like, people should go read Japhet, Japhet. And she's got a huge commentary on Chronicles, First and Second Chronicles. There are people that specialize in this, right? And how it is that Chronicles, even though it's less reliable, it has its own style, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's wise to read this divorced from what you see in First Samuel, because like in First Samuel, the end of First Samuel, like 28, that's the story that's being referred to here, where he says here, a familiar spirit. If you remember the Witch of Endor,
one of my favorite stories. Yep.
Yeah, it's dope, right? Always makes me think of Star Wars.
Yeah,
because of the moon of Endor, right? Isn't that what it was called?
Yeah.
And coincidence? No. But
no.
But like Saul's not getting the response from the Lord that he used to, or that he thinks he should, and so he goes to this witch, who is hiding and is in secret, and he finds her, and
I want to point out for the audience, has actual powers.
Yeah,
right? Just like the magical place of Endor, the Witch of Endor is a magical lady. So for real,
she conjures up the spirit of Samuel, who had died, right? And Samuel's like, what the fuck? What are you bothering me for?
Who disturbs my slumber?
New spirit, who dis? No, but but he pronounces that, hey, you didn't do what you were supposed to do in 1 Samuel 15, the big passage that we all talk about all the time, how he's supposed to kill all the Amalekites, and he doesn't. And now here the chronicler is bringing up that this event in and of itself, seeking this medium, the spirit, and says, well, I think it's like by tomorrow or something, you and your sons will be with me, right? Y'all gonna die.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's important to recognize that in this text, when it talks about he slew him, of course, I don't remember the point that he's going to make here specifically, but I mean, like, this is because of all the things that Saul's done, all the ways that he's disobeyed and how he's been unfaithful. This is the whole point of the narrative. Saul bad, David good, right?
Right. Yeah.
Passed over to David.
So yeah, when he so his I'm gonna play this until he makes his little. He gives his reason for why Saul took a sword and fell upon it, which is, when I heard it, like even for me, I kind of stopped what I was doing, rewound real quick, and I was like,
What you talking about, Willis?
Yeah, I was like, I don't remember Saul's story working out that way. Like, but it's based on like how he describes his like quote unquote suicide. So this is kind of, I thought it was funny.
Same chapter. 1 Chronicles 10, verse 4-5. Look what it says. So Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he likewise on the sword fell on it and died. So in other words, this is a prime example of how, if you just read 1 Chronicles 10:13 and it says he, the Lord, slew Saul, right? It looks like God is the immediate cause of Saul's death, right? If you just read that, if you just isolate that verse. Yet, when you read 1 Chronicles 10:4 and 5, Saul is the one that took the sword and fell on it. So how did Saul die? He killed himself. You say, okay, well, wait a minute. And then is this a contradiction?
Sort of.
This verse says that.
and this is the part that he gets into a justification for this that I started giggling. I mean, I had to pause this like 4 times because I was taking phone calls, and I would have to like, I got to stop watching this video.
Saul's sitting there drinking, and he's at the bar and just can't take it anymore.
Yeah,
my dog died, my truck broke down. So he fell on his sword.
It's the country song version of King Saul. So he started, and I could see it coming around the corner. I'm like, I don't think this is accurate. So
you should just read. I mean, I know you're probably going to do that, but we should just read the passage. It's not that long. I'm going
to do that as soon as I think he's going to wrap this up. He's going to make his final point, at least as far as Saul goes.
That Saul took a sword and he fell on it. He committed suicide. And then when we read verse 13, it says the Lord slew him. So which is it? This is what I want you guys to notice, is understanding biblical language. Stop for a second. Stop looking at the Bible like it was written from Los Angeles. Don't look at the Bible like that. Understand.
My guess is Resurrected Eyes lives in Los Angeles.
Look at it like it's written from Oklahoma.
You need to picture yourself in Birmingham, Alabama, and now work your way up.
And right, the culture, and understand that the way that they express, the way that they wrote their Hebrew idioms and things like that are different, right? And so for the Hebrews, right, to the Hebrew mind, if God permitted something, right, they would say he did it. When they said he did it, they don't necessarily always mean that he's the immediate cause. That's not how they meant it. If something happened, they would say God did it in the sense that he permitted it. And here is a prime example. Why? Who was the immediate cause of Saul's death? Saul. How do we know? He took a sword and he fell on it, right? So Saul is the immediate cause of his death. He killed himself. But yet they can say the Lord slew him in the sense that it was in the permissive. God allowed it. Now, why would God allow it? Because it tells you in the same verse that Saul went to a woman who had a familiar spirit. Saul was not seeking God for counsel. Saul was not following God. Saul was in disobedience persistently, consistently. So he did not experience God's protection. So God allowed him to commit that act, right? Because to commit suicide, right, is not something that the Holy Spirit is ever going to lead someone to do.
There it is. Okay, so the Holy Spirit is never going to lead you to commit suicide. That's okay, fine. But this again emphasizes that this guy's contextual take on Saul's quote unquote suicide is that we all feel sad from time to time. We get them dark thoughts. Okay, so now this is a perfect place to pause it and read it. So I'm going to start from the beginning because this guy is all about the context. If you only read the text, then you get a con or something like that. He's got a little thing with that.
Yeah.
So Saul takes his life, right? And that, thanks to the NIV, that's how they title that. For anybody out there who not real doesn't really care about the way the Bible is interpreted. The actual documents do not have chapter headings like the NIV helpfully has. But chapter 10, now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead upon Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons. They killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him. So Saul's been wounded by arrow fire. Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows," love that word, fellows, "will come and abuse me." His armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his house died together. Right? And that gets you up to about just verse 7.
Yeah.
Verse 7. So the situation is, he's already been killed as a result of fighting against the Philistines. He is not being protected by God at this point. He loses 3 sons. He himself is wounded by arrows. And he knows that the Philistines, when they catch him, are going to probably execute him anyway after they treat him like a piñata.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's like, you need to kill me before these guys, turn me into some kind of, abuse clown.
Yeah. Which is what they do. It's just he's already dead when they do it.
Yeah. So he knows it's done. It's over. So yeah. So and the issue here is that if this guy, if Resurrected Eyes has an issue with like atheists saying like, okay, well, by the time you get down to verse 10:13, and I just wanted to check that, because in this NIV version, what does it say? So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He did not keep the word of the Lord, and even consulted a medium for guidance, and did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. Okay, so I've never read this and had an issue with it as an atheist or a skeptic. It's pretty clear that his protection's been removed, like that the language is maybe like a term of art. No big issue there. So
yeah, I don't even that whole idea of how'd you word it? Hedge of protection. Yeah, I don't know that I would say it that way. I mean, it's a sort of a theological point, but it's fine. I mean, in other words, I don't think that God is like doing this all the time. Like stay back.
Yeah. I'm trying to just repeat his thing, because I don't. I don't think that even in. I mean, I don't know I don't read ancient Hebrew, so I don't know how to read into the original one. But even in the context that I get, you get this in church though, and he gets really into this. The idea is you made a covenant with God, and God keeps all the bad stuff away from it until you do something bad, and then what God does is He takes a step back. The gate gets pulled up, and all the bad stuff comes running in. That's not God. That's the stuff that God was keeping away from you. But you went and pissed him off. And I'm like, even as a young person that was a young believer, I always had an issue with that kind of characterization with it, because it was like, because even if you were talking about a king, like a suzerain, you wouldn't refer to it in that way.
Yeah. Like, Sodom and Gomorrah, the fire and brimstone is always trying to fall. God is just holding it. But no, stay back. And then they didn't repent. And so he's like, all right, you know what? Go ahead.
Where you settled as prone to meteor fire. I've just been keeping it back, but you guys just keep raping and keep raping.
And so now I'm just going to let them do their thing. Like obviously there's now we're getting into like theological ideas, maybe deeper theological ideas. I mean, certainly there's this idea of chaos comp, right? And that there's forces of chaos that God has to slay. And in some passages, you see that as like a done thing. In other passages, you see it as they continue to come up. But I just don't know that there's this idea that God is like a gatekeeper.
Right.
I don't think that's a good way to describe it.
And he's going to get into it more, because he's going to start getting into his covenant thing. And I think, let's see, where are we at? We're at about 12. I'm going to let him ramble for just about a minute. If he doesn't, I'll kind of keep an eye on where he's at, but might jump ahead to about the 20-minute mark, because I think that's where he gets into his next big point.
But yet it happened with Saul. So I want you guys to look at these 2 verses. Before we go any further, I want you to look at these 2 verses, and I want you to see that in one sense, you could say God did it in the sense of permitting it, allowing it, right? Why did he allow it? Because Saul was in disobedience. Saul was not trying to follow God. God is not obligated to protect us, right? Especially in the Old Testament, when you're not following him. If you're not in the Old Testament, under that old covenant, if you weren't following God, you weren't listening to him, he wasn't obligated to protect you, right? It's called covenant. God keeps the covenant. He keeps his agreement always. The problem was man was not always keeping his agreement with God, right? And so when there's an agreement, that means that God has to keep his word. And so in that old covenant, God many a times would say, if you obey me, if you follow my voice, if you heed my commandments, I will do this, 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 and this, and this. And included in all of those blessings is God's protection, favor, and blessing and peace. However, many a times the people went against God. They didn't follow his commandments. They didn't follow him. So guess what? They didn't get his protection. It's part of the covenant. Do you understand that? All right. So
right.
You can see that. So
sorry. So like the two main passages that talk about that are Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26.
Which I think he does actually put those up on the screen.
Oh,
Deuteronomy 28. Yeah, at one point.
Like this is the whole blessings and curses thing, right? So this is what Daniel picks up on in Daniel 9, or the writer of Daniel picks up on. But like in Leviticus 26, it's basically broken down into two unequal sections. One is the shorter section of, if Israel obeys, here are all the ways that I'll bless you. Right? God says, if you keep my covenant, do my commands. And it's this kind of short little section. And then there's this really long section that says, if you disobey, right, if you don't keep my commands and you continue to rebel, I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. And there are things like I'll make the heaven like iron, and the ground like iron, the heaven like bronze. I can't remember how it's set up, but like, no rain, no growth. Your enemies will eat the spoils. Eat all your stuff up, and your children will be killed on the highways. You're
going to eat your own dead.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and then if they still, refuse to repent, then I'll increase it 7-fold. Right. So, but the idea that all of those have, it's such an interesting way to deal with these problems. You have to assume then, I guess, and maybe this is the argument that he's going to make, that all of these things are famine and pestilence and children dying on the highways and all these horrible things. They're always trying to get at the people, and God is just the gatekeeper, right? And he's just holding all that shit back. And he's just let a little bit in here, let a little bit in there, as opposed to him saying, no, I'm orchestrating this. I'm bringing this about. And I don't know that you can get through the prophets. And I'm just sort of thinking about this from the hip, but like I'm certainly the way the Hebrew Bible sets this up is not God as just a gatekeeper. Like God is orchestrating these things. He's bringing these things about.
Yeah, because I think I think he actually brings it up later on in the video where it's something. I don't remember where the passage is, but it's like, this is why the Lord fed you to Shishak or whatever, the Pharaoh of Egypt or whatever, and it's like the language in that and some of the other passages that he kind of brushes over. Resurrected Eyes here, he kind of brushes over it, and it's like, okay, those parts, it doesn't sound like it'd be one thing to say like. And I'm just thinking, like, if you're looking at this language, if this was coming from somebody, they're kind of, from the Hebrew context, they're saying this Lord, this deity, right, is kind of like has a suzerain relationship with us, and we need to live up to our, standard and agreement. Otherwise, he won't. It's one thing for him to get angry and say, "You're nothing without me." Can you imagine how much harder this would be without me? Than to say, "Okay, you went and pissed me off. I am going to deliver you unto the Assyrians or unto the Babylonians." Like, wait, what? It's really different. Like, you're on your own. If you happen to get captured by the Babylonians, that's on you. I walked away from the deal because you stepped away from me first. But that's not what he's saying.
Right. Exactly.
That's not the prophets communicating it. Yeah.
Now, see, here's the complicating factor here is you do have an actual Hebrew semantic problem. And it's not a huge semantic problem. Most grammars, I don't think, even deal with it. And there's there's an article that was written, because this came up with somebody in the past year. Jay and I actually talked about this. there is a use of these two Hebrew stems. I think it's primarily in the Hifil stem, but it's also used in the PO. But basically what that means, the Hifil stem is, if I were to say Johnny ate a piece of cake, that would be, a simple active, transitive statement. Johnny is the agent, and he's eating. The subject is doing something. He's eating a piece of cake. But if he said, Jimmy made Susie or caused Susie to eat a piece of cake, right? Then you have a causative sentence. Jimmy did something to, and you could picture maybe like he's got Susie and he's forcing a piece of cake in her mouth, right? So Hebrew has a way that it'll take a verb, and it'll put it into that particular stem. They call the Hifil stem, and make it a causative verb. So while the word achal might mean to eat, he'echol or he'echil, I'd have to think about the form there, would be like he made eat. It'd be he'echil is what I would anticipate it would be. Anyway, he made eat. So but in that example, you might, so you can hear the causative idea, but in that same example, what you might mean by that is Johnny, who maybe has like the right to the cake, like he's the one that it's his piece of cake. When it says he caused Susie to eat it, what that might mean is he allowed Susie to eat it. Right? He gave over his right and allowed her to do it. He brought about the situation where Susie ate it by allowing her to do it.
Okay.
Right? But it's only context that can tell you that.
Yeah.
So there are passages, and Jeffrey T. Gay actually wrote an article on this. It's in the Zavit Festschrift, I think. It's recent, like sorry. If people are looking to, because I make a big deal out of that, right? I think it's 2018, 2017, something like that. But Zioni Zavit. But he wrote an article on the permissive or I think he calls it the tolerative. But it's not a different form of the verb. The verb looks the same.
But contextually, it changes to
it's a semantic thing. So, if you have an example like the one that he gives where it says, God allowed Moses or permitted Moses to see the promised land, but did not, let him go in. The verb there to see is ra'ah, but it's in the hifil, it's in the causative stem. So people have translated that he showed him, he caused him to see, he showed him the promised land. And that's fine. Like that's a fine translation, but it might in the context be, you have an earlier passage where Moses says, please let me see. I want to see the promised land. And so given that context, you're I think justified in translating, he allowed him to see. Like he caused him, like it's God allowing that to happen. He permit him to see, he let him see. That's a use of the hifil. And it also happens in the PO, but I think it's far less frequent. So there's a semantic aspect to this from a linguistic standpoint. But those are I think there are 44 cases. Somebody wrote a paper on this, and I can't remember. My gain, I think, is that. Anyway.
Well, I kind of wonder if maybe this YouTuber has been exposed to at least some of that, because I mean, he's not getting into it that way, but he's like, what you need to understand is that he's not getting into like, hey, a verb that we would have thought would have been like kind of it would maybe carry a coercive aspect to it, is more of a tolerative aspect.
Yeah.
It's not God, coercing or encouraging or actively doing it, but at the same time, like if the way he's bringing this up is like, in these circumstances, when it looks bad, think of it this way.
Right, exactly.
But in situations where it looks the other way, well, then reverse it. Like, what?
Yeah, that's the point. You can't start with, all right, which one do I want this to be? Now, can I think about it in that way? Is it possible to see it that way? What you have to do is come to it as much as you can and say, what is it that the context is demanding here?
Yeah.
And I think like this one's an important one because this is I think he gives a good example here, right? And I remember reading, because I did hear this point, and I remember reading Yafet's commentary on this, and like she talks about there's an aspect of double causality here. What she's not saying, and I don't think that the point of the passage here is that God is just, holding back the Philistines until until Saul sins enough and then like letting them in.
Yep.
I think God is orchestrating this and God is bringing this about, but is not doing it as the direct agent. And that's the point. There's a double causality.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. And I think that the odd thing about this too is when you start going down this path of like trying to push back, what he kind of started off with was the skeptic's notion of blaming this deity. And then he kind of goes into an apologist mode where he's like, no, God's not to blame for this. Then it starts explaining reasons why. That's when I start to kind of like, I mean, when I was kind of new to kind of being a skeptic, kind of like, had deconverted, I was probably a little bit more bitter. So I would have reacted a little bit more harshly to this kind of what I would have thought was just kind of a lazy attempt to kind of salvage a reputation, because it would have been like, oh, look, this thing, if you're going to anthropomorphize blame in this sense, and you have a problem with somebody blaming God for stuff, then don't turn around and say that he's not legally obligated to do things, because you're just kind of feeding into that. If you want to say it's categorically different because he's a creator God, like at that point, it's like, okay, then you're basically just letting him off the hook because, it's just, he's mysterious or he knows so much, like, it opens up more and more problems, but that would be, that's one way to handle it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this kind of take where he's like, it almost is like, I don't want to hear you say that God did something bad, or I don't want you blaming God for things. It's like, I don't think this God, given the traits you tend to say it has a problem with blame.
Yeah.
So I've always thought that was a little weird. Like if I'm blaming him, I don't think he minds.
And this is the thing. Actually, this example is a really good one. Said that, but I think that actually this passage, Yafet argues that the first section before you get to like verse 12 or 13, I mean, I guess it is 13 where it starts, that's the original story. Like that's and it's very secular, she calls it. Like it's not, things aren't being attributed directly to God in that. And it's this summary statement here in 13 where God, it's being attributed to God, like God, it's being tacked on afterwards. Like, hey, wait a minute, just remember, this didn't just happen. Like God brought this about. This was God's judgment on Saul. God is the one taking it from Saul and giving it to.
And that kind of because once he started getting into Chronicles, he got into the story. I read the intro in the study Bible that I have, but then I started reading the intro in the Hebrew study Bible that I have. And that's even more interesting because it's interesting to contrast them. In the Oxford Bible that I've got, in that Old Testament section, it talks about some of like the Hebrew interpretation of it and sort of like modern Jewish scholars' takes on it. The Hebrew Bible, obviously, their intro was like 6 pages long on Chronicles, and Chronicles is tucked into like towards the end of the Ketuvim, and so they just treat it as a totally different piece of writing, and most of the emphasis, like it gets into the whole thing. They thought that the author was the same as Ezra, but now I guess that's not really a thing. But the idea is like it's sort of going through kind of a history, but it's doing everything with a theological bent. There's a theological angle to everything, and that makes sense with the commentary that you're saying, because he lists off, this seems like kind of mundane. He goes into battle with his sons are killed, he's injured. Hey, I don't want to get turned over to these guys, kill me. No, all right, I'll fall on my own sword, blah blah blah. And then the chronicler is like, that was God killed him.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and theologically that makes sense. That's part of the narrative that he's pushing. So all right.
Permissive right there. Now, here's another objection that people bring up. they will quote verses like this. Look at Jeremiah 29:17. Thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will send upon them the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and will make them like vile figs that cannot be eaten. They are so evil, right? So just looking at this verse, if we have a Western understanding of looking at this verse, what are you going to think? You're going to think, well, God is the immediate cause. He's actively sending the sword. He's actively sending the famine. But that's not how the Hebrews meant it, right? And again, for the skeptic,
he knows better. This part gets right back into what you were talking about. And I don't know if it's just because I've been doing this long enough, watching enough of these. Anytime I see a Christian, a YouTube Christian apologist start saying, this is what the Hebrew word is there, and this is why I'm going to call out the translators, because that's essentially what they're arguing. Like, your argument isn't with me. Your argument is with scholarly translation of English language Bibles. So,
listening. This is not my opinion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and again, so in that verse, I'd have to look at it. It's interesting to note that he sort of just skips over number 1, which is the primary usage of Shalach and the Pio. And well, this is the one that I want, right? This is the one but what is that? 29:17. I want to pull it up here. Bible Works. Yeah. So if he's trying to argue that there's a semantic use of permissive here, then it seems like it would have to carry over into the second verb there. Right. So if we should translate this here, behold, I will allow. How would I translate that permissively? I will permit to be sent upon them. I will set free upon them.
Yeah, see, that it's sort of like to loosen, right? Like, it'd be different to say, like, okay, here's how it works, right? There's a bunch of wolves outside your gates,
right?
You tick me off, I'm going to open a door, and if it's like the Simpsons, like, I'm going to close my eyes and start spinning my fists, and if you happen to walk, and I'm just going to walk forward, if my fists happen to hit you, it's your fault, But that's not what he's doing in this case. Like, he's like, here's what's going to happen. I have some wolves,
right?
And you tick me off, and I will unleash them upon you.
Yeah, I mean, and this is but the point that I'm making from a linguistic standpoint is that you have a second verb here that God is saying will happen here.
Yeah.
So, and it's Natan, so will make is like to set people, set them. And it's not in the Hifil or the PO. And anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not the context is what has to drive this. And you can't just select which one you want. I mean, God uses verbs like I will stir up the Babylonians. I will stir up the Assyrians.
Yeah, it's like he's a rabble rouser. He's inciting them toward and causing enmity against his own chosen people because they disobeyed. And it's like, and I kind of feel like, in this sense, like he's picking his verses carefully to show this. But even in this, like we were talking about before, when you got like something like Jeremiah here, thus saith the Lord, I will send upon them the sword. And he's trying to argue like, no, it's just I'm going to allow it to happen. Like, he's trying to go back to that same example. And without getting into the semantics or anything, it's like, this is kind of a different scenario here. Like, if you're talking about Saul, clearly he didn't have Saul's back when Saul was fighting the Philistines. So that example sort of works. But in this case, he's like, no, I'm going to make sure that pestilence, like, does he prevent, if this narrative is true, then he's going to allow famine and pestilence and stuff like that to happen. How did this work for any cultures outside of the Israelites? Was everything just terrible because they didn't have Yahweh? or did they also have similar narratives where it was like, no, we also have a God that we sacrifice to, and if we do these things, make the propitiations, then it blesses us, and if we neglect it, it punishes us. Like, this doesn't seem like it's all that different.
you can't, this is theologically, you can't have theologically motivated translations, right? That from a translational standpoint, that's bad.
Yeah.
This is why the translators don't do this sort of thing. You have to say, what is it that the writer was trying to get across? Now, it's obvious, I think, to anybody that's studied the prophets that God is responsible for bringing the Egyptians, bringing the Babylonians, bringing the Assyrians, right? Bringing them against, or stirring them up to do these things. But that it's not that God is sitting back and going, well, damn.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the Babylonians were going to do, so I'm just going to let it happen, right? Like God is in control of orchestrating these events, but that doesn't and this is the key. It doesn't in the text. It doesn't negate the responsibility of the free will agent,
right?
And that's important. I think that's an important thing to remember, that the text is trying to say God's in control, God is sovereign, God does these things, but man is still responsible. I don't know why this is problematic.
Yeah, and the interesting thing for the purpose of this video is that he believes that this is like super problematic for skeptics, and it's like I mean, maybe to somebody who's kind of like I mean, they might, if they're going through the Bible and they're reading it cover to cover kind of thing, and they ran across this, they'd be like, I've never heard anybody specifically having issues with this. They just kind of generally are like, have you read these prophets? Like, these guys talk, they talk some mad shit about God. Like, it's pretty weird. So yeah, other than that, so it just seems kind of weird. Like, if a skeptic has this general impression, like, when God gets ticked off, you don't want to tick him off, not the God of the OT. And then they're like, okay, well, if you actually look at Hebrew, it equals shalak. And then
right.
It's like, okay, pump the brakes there, nerd. I was just talking in kind of very generally speaking.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, the skeptics that I hear are the ones that are saying, why is it that God is giving a command in Numbers 31 to take virgin women as plunder? Why is it that, 1 Samuel 15, God is saying to Saul, go kill everyone, including the infants and the children?
Yeah.
Right? Why is that happening?
Right. Well, if you look at the verb, like,
look at the verb.
He's just allowing the Israelites to do that. Like,
he's allowing himself to give that command.
Yeah, just like, you know what? I wanted to treat myself to a little genocide, and it's been really tough. We've been through a few covenants already. It's just, these humans are killing me.
I already got my Batman outfit.
Do you?
Damn it! No, it's
no, for Parks and Rec when he.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, because they can't get him to spend on anything. He buys a pair of socks or something. Like, no, what do you want to get? Like, I needed socks. Like, no, it's about what you want to indulge yourself with. Like,
he's sitting there on the bench eating his like cup of noodles.
Yeah. They drive by him there, like, oh my God, what is he doing? Like, get him in the car. He's coming with us.
Oh God. Sorry, everybody that doesn't watch Parks and Rec.
Watch Parks and Rec.
Yeah, there you go. That's God allows you. He permits you to watch Parks and Rec.
He permitted it to be made, so it's part of his plan.
But he will punish you for doing it.
He'll punish you for only watching that and not The Office. You need to watch both for context. And then get into debates with friends about which one is better.
Right. Yeah. That's the important bit.
Yeah. Then it's basically like, Jews versus Christians at that point. Like, the original's better. No. Parks, that's New Testament Office. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting whippy.
Danny, I'm going to show you from the scriptures, because the Bible interprets the Bible, right? So when you look at it, the word send in Hebrew is shalak. And send, depending upon the context, it can mean to dismiss, to give over. It can also mean to let go, to set free, to let loose. Right? And so
it can mean to dismiss or to give over. What about to send?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well,
primary meaning.
Yeah, it's like I found in certain contexts it can mean this kind of more passive verb. I prefer that's how you take it, Mr. Skeptic or confused Christian. Yeah.
I'm going to show you guys that in the Old Testament, when you see a lot of times where it says God will send this or send that, it's not in the active sense. And we're going to get into what that means. So to send, to shalak, is to
Okay, I'm gonna
28:20. What does it say? The Lord shall send.
Here we go. So yeah, he just kind of repeats a bunch of stuff, and then basically he wraps it up with it's about covenants, people. Do you understand? And then now he's getting into does God send curses? This reminds me. Speaking of Parks and Recreation, it reminds me of Ken Hotate, the casino owner.
Yeah,
and they're trying to set up the Harvest Festival or whatever. He's like,
Yes.
is the one thing I know about white people. They are deathly afraid of curses, and a big grin on his face.
Doobie.
Do. I'm not saying anything right now. None of these words mean anything. Yeah. He's one of my favorite characters in that. I wish they'd done more with him.
It is great.
we've been getting you to give us your money since the 70s or something like that. Like, oh, nice.
Shalak, upon thee, cursing, vexation, and rebuke, in all that you set your hand to, until you be destroyed, until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me. Do you see that? You have what? Forsaken me. Why is that important? Because look at the context. He's talking about people who are not following the covenant. Now, what you have to understand is Deuteronomy 28, it lists out the blessings and it lists out the curses. God is giving them the conditions of the covenant. He's telling them, listen, if you keep the covenant, if you follow me and you listen, this is what I'm going to do for you. And he begins to list it out. And all the blessings, all the fruitfulness, all the prosperity, all the protection, all the peace is wrapped up in the blessings of that covenant. However, this is the Old Testament. And so the Old Testament, right, they were under a different covenant in the sense that it's based on what? Based on their obedience, based on their performance, right? It's not like the new covenant. It's not a different God. It's a different covenant. So in the Old Testament, they were under a different covenant. So when you read the Old Testament, you have to understand that God is not being harsh. What he's showing mankind in this context is that you are not going to be able to be faithful and keep this covenant.
Boom, right there. That is a problem theologically, because if you try to say that the Old Testament covenant, the old covenant is based on this notion that God chooses the Israelites as a people, and as long as they obey the law and do what he says, they're going to get the good stuff. And when they fail to live up to that, they're going to get the bad stuff. Whether God visits that upon them directly, or he allows it to happen, or orchestrates it, however you want to do that, that's the basic carrot and stick nature of that thing. And he's like, okay, so from that, I would agree with him at this point, just to kind of put a pin in it, and like, okay, if you look at it from that perspective, that's just God's relationship to these particular people in these parts of these narratives. Okay, good enough. But when you try to harmonize it with New Testament theology, and God's like, no, it's a carrot and stick relationship, but I know damn well it's mostly going to be the stick, because you can't live up to it. You won't be able to live up to it until I die for your sins, and you won't have to deal with this stuff anymore. That is more than harsh. That's just kind of twisted. In an effort to harmonize this kind of Hebrew culture, this cultural artifact that is these narratives within the New Testament or the Old Testament writings with a New Testament theological bent, is, I mean, just that commits you to so many problems and contradictions. Yeah. As soon as I heard that when I was listening to the first one, I'm like, oh, I should have known he was going to do that. Like, you know, because that's the thing. You're like, oh, you don't have to live up to the law anymore or anything like that. I'm like, yeah, you do. I mean, you still kind of do. Even as a Christian, you kind of do.
He wants them to see that, because in Exodus 19, and I'm not going to get off topic, but in Exodus 19, they boasted and they said, all that God commands us, we are well able to do. That's what they said in Exodus 19. Then God changes his.
That one I wanted to ask about. Do you know what that's in context to?
Yeah. So, and this is something that actually I used to make when I pastored. This was a passage I used to talk about quite a bit. So in Exodus 19, they're at Sinai, and they're seeing all the thunderings, and they're getting the law, right?
Yeah.
And so Moses says, here it is set before you. And the people respond, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And immediately there's a separation set in place between God and the mountain and the people. And so, like, I haven't looked since my fundamentalist understanding of that passage. I haven't revisited it in this aspect for this purpose, to think about is the way that I understood that the right way.
Okay.
And there are a lot of passages like that, but that's what it's in context. That's the context. That's what it's in reference to.
I guess I never took that passage to think that they were boasting. I just thought it was sort of like a kind
Agreed.
of like an ascent. Yeah.
The way that I used to teach it was up to that point, they should have realized that they couldn't. Like they you know, that God's been incredibly merciful and gracious and doing all the work for them. In fact, it says in chapter 19, just before this, like, I brought you out on eagle's wings. Like he brought them out in the Exodus. He's the one that did it all. But whether we should be understanding that as that they should have that in their mind, that God is setting before them this covenant, that they should, you know, I used to teach it like they should have thrown their hands up and said, whoa, we can't do that. We're sinful, horrible people. We can't obey this, you know, keep this covenant.
Would God have moved up his timetable? Pop Jesus down right then if they had done that?
Boom.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, they get it. Here you go. Nope.
Yeah. I would like to look back at it and see if this is just sort of suzerain vassal treaty acceptance language, right? I suspect that's what it is.
Okay.
Is you know, just look, the suzerain is saying, here are the stipulations, do you agree? And they're saying, yes, we agree. But I haven't looked at it from that perspective, so nobody should quote me on that.
One of the things that happens, I don't know how long it takes him to get into this. Let me. He stays on this for a while, but it's really weird because he stays on this "does God send curses" thing for probably the better part of about 10 more minutes on this. And for anybody, I will post the link to this original one. I didn't do it in the description. I will put it back in there once we're done. So if anybody wants to go back and watch this original one, go to his channel, see his other videos. You know, I'll make sure that's in there. He essentially says that God doesn't send curses because that's, you know, God allows stuff to happen. He doesn't actively do it. He just steps back and lets other malefactors engage. And
so
then
the flood, like the flood, would he say that?
I'm sure that would be like, you could probably talk to him for the rest of his life about that, or the rest of his believing life about that. Until he either gave up on you. I can't imagine. I can't imagine how he squares that with some of the stuff he's doing here. Like I don't
like the flood waters are always trying to get back, and so God just removes his edge of protection from the earth. And
I've heard people say that because or at least I've never heard anybody commit to it that way, like in the same way that he's committing to some of this. Like,
I will destroy all flesh. I will allow to be destroyed.
Yeah, but there's a passage somewhere in there where it's talking about, because that understanding, you know, the firmament, or where there's waters from below and the waters from above, and it actually mentions the waters. Like he's basically allowing the waters to just sort of fill the space, because, you know, it was because of him that he was there. So they kind of make the same justification, like, but it's like, okay, but he sort of makes it pretty clear to Noah that he's visiting wrath upon.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird.
Well, first, yeah, I mean, this is the bigger point, right? I mean, I feel like I'm getting down into semantically, you have to make the argument that this Hifil form should be understood as a tolerative, right? It should be understood as a, you know, permissive, in a permissive sense. There are very specific cases where that's true, different categories, and Tige has, I think he has 3 that he develops. That doesn't mean that's all of them, but you know, somebody requests something and then God puts that the word is in the causative, and it's, you know, he's allowing them to, so that would be tolerative. Or, you know, somebody wants, that would be a request. Somebody wants something, but you have to make the case that this particular instance should most probably be understood as a tolerative.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm listening for. But if we're just talking about like broader theological concepts, that's not as interesting to me.
I think that's the problem with some of this, is because I think that he wants to talk about a sort of broad, consistent theological concept that you can apply across all these Old Testament narratives. And then in order to justify it, he's going to dip a toe into some scholarly criticism or a little bit of ancient Hebrew semantics and stuff to try to bolster that. And it's like, yeah, that's not really, like, I mean, I expect this kind of stuff from apologists generally, but like, I think it's weird that they're willing to engage up to a point with things like, saying that you gotta take into account Hebrew culture, ancient Israelite context, and all this other kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but you're only taking it into account up to the point that it supports a theological claim that you've got, and you can kind of weave it into a consistent theological philosophy that you need to go all the way back to Genesis and extend to the end of Revelation.
Yeah,
that's and that is what I think is the most problematic. And yeah, like if you were, I mean, even the first example that you give, like Sodom and Gomorrah, like that's a pretty active case of God just smiting some people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the idea, I think, that he's like, well, skeptics come up to me and have a problem with God killing Saul. It's like, well, he killed some cities before, and then he sort of drowned the entire world at one point. But let's focus in on Saul's death at the hands of the Philistines. It's odd, but essentially what he does at this point is he's kind of making the same kind of claim, the same theological claim. God doesn't curse directly, but if he wanted to, he could. He actually kind of gets into that. He's not legally obligated, because he's not legally obligated to protect people from bad things. If once he allows those bad things to happen, people interpret them as curses. There's nothing wrong with that. Like,
yeah, okay. I just, you have to, in order to understand it this way, I think, I don't know, there are so many assumptions that you have to make that I don't think are justified.
Yeah.
So in 2 Kings 2, I think, is where the Elisha story is about the she-bears. You have to assume that there are 2 she-bears just like waiting all the time. They're just always trying to kill children, right? All the time. They're just saying God has just got his hand there. And then okay, go ahead. There's always 2 she-bears here waiting to kill 42 kids. And so I just let them go. As opposed to God orchestrates and causes 2 she-bears to come up and kill the 42 kids, right? This is why translators translate this way.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't know about this language of letting or allowing or permitting. It's that the context doesn't call for it. Anyway.
Just want to, I'll actually highlight this one. Carlton Winston, all bears all the time. Yeah, that seems to be the case for Elisha. Like right after his boss gets to go up in a whirlwind, he's got to deal with a bunch of snot-nosed kids.
Little kids too.
Calling him Baldy. Well, he does get into Elisha. I'm trying to find that now. Let me see here. Does he get in? Break my covenant. God, blah, blah. Gets into Deuteronomy. Okay, let me see.
Sure. And I mean, like he points it out there's language like hide my face. I will hide my face. There's no question about that. That's why I say this isn't like a monolithic text where you can just say that, okay, God is always speaking in the sense that I mean, there are times that God directly does something, right? In other words, that he is the agent and that he's acting directly upon the object. Whereas, acting directly upon somebody that is the object of his wrath, there are certainly times that he, like, for example, in 2 Samuel 12, I think that's where the story of David's baby is. The text is there. Like he causes, like he strikes, the verb there, nagaf, like he strikes the baby, right?
Yeah.
So there's a direct engagement with the object there, but most of the time, you have some tool that he's using, right? This is how God operates. Right, even if it's a natural tool that he's using, but again, be that a person or some natural disaster or whatever, there are times that there's supernatural intervention, like right? Just God kills him, drops dead, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not monolithic. There's no one size fits all here. So I think appealing to language like God will hide his face in the curse. First of all, it's idiomatic. But the idea behind it is that, like, it's the opposite, right, of Leviticus. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, because the one that I froze on here at about 30, almost 35 minutes in, he's got 26. He's got Leviticus 26:29, which is, "You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters."
Right.
Now that is a verse when taken out of context that skeptics will, the people's eyebrow will go up like, what? Yeah, you're going to need to explain that. And then it just like, oh well, it's just that's the Old Testament for you.
Right.
Just gonna blow up. Let me see. I was wondering. I was trying to pull up where he gets into, because he's just getting into more and more. God gives you blessings, and then he doesn't, and then he stops. It might actually be later on, but around 40. Yeah, this is where he gets into the smiting. And this story, this will, I think, will be the last point, and then we can kind of wrap it up. But this one, I'll play this out because he does the same thing here that he did with the part from First Chronicles.
I'm gonna put it full screen, guys, so that way you guys can see it. It says, "And the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed the Benjamites. That day, 25,000 and 100 men. All these drew the sword." So in Judges 20, verse 35, it says, "The Lord smote Benjamin." What does that mean? What does that mean that God smote Benjamin? Well, someone will say, well, that just means that God killed him. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean that God shot a lightning bolt from heaven? What do you mean? We have to let the Bible interpret the Bible.
Who would say that? Has anybody ever said that?
Right. It's a weird question. I don't think most even skeptics and a lot of Christians have a problem with the idea that God does some smiting. Right.
Look, I mean, God, you have this everywhere, right? This is how language works. So Nebuchadnezzar destroys, Jerusalem. Well, did Nebuchadnezzar destroy Jerusalem?
Yeah, it was his armies. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Nebuchadnezzar does, but he uses his army as the means to do so.
Right.
The means is a secondary issue. Right. What is it that's bringing it about? What is orchestrating it? What is the behind the scenes cause? This whole idea about, well, we can't blame God or we can't hold God responsible because he wasn't the immediate cause is silly to me. In the same way that if you hire a hitman, you can't say, well, I mean, I told the hitman, sure wish my so-and-so was dead, and I've got some spare money that I'd be willing to give up, and then I released my hedge of protection from my person.
It's like, well, our conversation was entirely hypothetical, and I may have left a briefcase full of cash behind.
Right, it's like, no, the judge isn't going to go, oh, so you didn't actually. I mean, think about it. The Nippur murder trial is a really good example of this. So there's a Sumerian case, legal case from, I suspect I haven't looked at it, I think it's an old Babylonian legal case, but it's like a mock, like a hypothetical case that's being utilized here. I don't remember if it's based on something actual. I think it's just a scribal exercise, but it's trying to get, anyway, it doesn't matter. But the woman, so you have a wife and her husband is killed, and they're debating about whether the wife should be punished or not. And essentially the wife is held to a higher level of responsibility because she knew about the murder plot. She knew about it. I don't even think the text, I'd have to go back and read it again, but I don't even think the text attributes to her the mastermind. She's not the mastermind behind it. She just knew about it, I think is how the court case is set out. And she's held to, she's killed, right? That's the judgment. Because she allowed it to happen. She didn't warn her husband, or she kept it from him, or whatever. And so, this idea that God has no culpability or has less culpability or whatever, because here, when he smites Benjamin, his tool for doing so is, a group of people that he's handing them over to. I mean, I don't understand.
Yeah, anyway. and he leaves out the context of how this starts, and then he gets into something. When he gets into a few other verses, it's kind of interesting. I might get into that a little bit. I'll
stop talking for a while. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Because I don't know. I don't think he goes on for this one for very long. But it's interesting. There's a point in here, and if I could have wound it to, I know it was around the 40-minute mark. So we'll just play through and see what he gets into.
Look at Judges 20, verse 28. Same context. We see here the Lord said, "Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand." Guess which word is used? Nathan, which means what? To permit, to give over, to allow. I'm going to give them over into your.
I pronounce it Nathan. I pronounce it Nathan. I know this is killing you, so we won't push this much longer.
No, I don't care. Yeah, sorry. It's only when I get frustrated with people that are sort of arrogantly
what's the word?
Critiquing people that have been doing this for. Yeah.
It's like calling out a gotcha on a word that they looked it up in a concordance or something like that, and they're like, aha, see, it's there, so it must mean the same thing there. It's like, okay, I've told this to guys like Jesus is Lord and stuff. They're like, they're just pulling it off of a concordance or whatever, and I'm like, look, you can do that, or with the interlinears, and it's like, you can do that, but the problem with doing that is that you run the risk of transliteration.
Yeah,
and they're like, I was pretty sure that they didn't know what that meant. I'm like, you couldn't do this with some modern languages. You couldn't do that with Arabic. You can't do it with Japanese. You can't just read it and then pull the words out and say, oh, well, this word directly translates to this. Like, you can do that with maybe German, right? German, usually the word means something very, very specific, right? But with certain languages, it's like, no, you can't just pull each word out and say, this is how it translates, cram them back together, make a sentence out of it, and hope to make sense out of it. It will be complete nonsense.
Just try it in English.
Yeah. Every language has some component to that, but it's like, but when, these guys are like you're comparing ancient Hebrew to English, and you're doing it one word at a time. Like, I don't think that's a smart idea. Like, and again, it comes down to this, like, well, instead of trusting the scholars that translated the Bible and providing a translation that's going to give you the gist of what's going on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to argue against the Christian that's raising the question, or argue against the skeptic that's raising an objection, go into my interlinear, find this word in Hebrew, and then do what I can to quote unquote exegete the passage that way. It's like, okay, you do realize that exegesis was supposedly done in order to translate these into English.
Yes.
You're just blowing off their exegesis and saying that, no, I can do this myself. Like, I think that's incredibly arrogant. And
it is. That's the problem with it to me.
Your hand is what God was telling them, right? And then when we look at Judges 20, verse 48, it was not God directly that smote Benjamin. It says actually the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them down with the edge of the sword. So God delivered, his protection was not on the Benjamites. He removed his protection off the Benjamites, and the men of Israel were able to win over the Benjamites. That's the context. It's not God actively striking the Benjamites. Rather, it's God removing his protection from the Benjamites, and he's allowing the Benjamites to be overtaken. Now, the next question is, but why? Why did God allow the Benjamites to be defeated like that? I mean, look how many people it was. 25,100. Why? It's a good question. So let's take a look at it. When we look at the context, I want you guys to see this, because the backdrop is what atheists
I'll let them finish.
And skeptics will never tell you. Atheists and skeptics are not going to read the context. They're not going to read the backdrop.
Of course
They're
not.
Spoiler alert. He doesn't give you the whole context either. That's where things that's where this gets real juicy. So not only will the atheists and skeptics not tell you the whole story, here's the thing. The atheists and the skeptics aren't really, are they obligated to know the entire story? Like, you as a Christian, if you're presenting this little message to them, say this is being presented to them by a pastor who's not giving them the full background, right? Reading 5-6 verses in this little story and then spinning it into a sermon to deliver the weekly thing. You're an atheist or a skeptic, and you're sitting there like, okay, I got some questions about that, because that sounds like BS, right? If the messenger has taken these things out of context, delivered this to Christian skeptics and atheists alike, and they're like, yeah, okay, I don't think that's all that right. And they're like, aha, but the atheist and skeptic doesn't have the context for it. Like, shouldn't the messenger have had the context too? Like, there's a little bit of responsibility going in both directions here. So yeah, he's gonna explain Judges 25 here, and it gets a little weird because he leaves a few things out.
It's a weird
going
story.
to let the Bible interpret.
Yeah,
the Bible.
it's really
Why?
strange.
Because that's not their agenda. Their agenda is to find a verse, try to make God look bad, try to make themselves look better, and try to.
I don't have to make myself look better. But being a skeptic is not something you would. He does this a little bit and quite a bit towards the end. I do not wish to be a skeptic and then act accordingly. Right. I have questions about certain things, especially religious claims, and therefore I can be labeled by others that I'm a skeptic, right? That's the label people can accurately call me. I don't go around and say I'm a skeptic, and as a skeptic, I should behave thus and so. Yeah. That's not how it works. I behave thus and so. I can be safely identified as a skeptic. I'm not doing this because I want to look better, because being a skeptic isn't necessarily cool. And I don't need to make God look bad, because if God's real, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And if God's just a story, and these stories are just narratives, he doesn't need any help looking any worse than he does.
Yeah. So. Like, there's a reason that people write books on these things,
right?
Evangelicals and liberals, alike. It's not because it's not a problem. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So let's see here.
To be justified in the rejection. That's their agenda. So you have to understand that. But for those of you tonight,
a skeptic doesn't necessarily need justification in their rejection. All they need is a lack of conviction. That's it. They're not convinced by it. And so that's it, right? There's a certain difference to that. Like there's a couple different claims, but that's getting into something philosophical. Yeah, I'm not going to chase that rabbit down the hole. So,
that are hungry. You want to be able to understand the Bible better. You want to be better equipped. You want to let God reveal himself through his word.
Those are not the same things. One is a theological claim. The last one is a theological goal. And the other one is slightly different. You can learn to understand the Bible, the Old Testament narratives, and the books of the New Testament better. If you're looking for that revelation from God, first of all, you don't really need to look for it. You're supposed to be able to just receive it as soon as you crack the damn book open. It's special revelation. Anyway.
For those of you, here's the answer. This is the backdrop of why the Benjamites were defeated. Why did God let that happen? Why? Here's your answer. Judges chapter 20. This is the previous chapter. Look at verse 5. And the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me, but instead they raped my concubine so that she died. Do you see that? So these men were so wicked that now...
This is good. Hold that comment. I'll let you talk. I just want to get this last part.
No, I'm sure that's what you're...
They raped the man's concubine, but they raped her until she died. That's harsh. That is...
That's harsh.
No, harsh is...
That's not nice.
Harsh is you brush your teeth, then boom, orange juice. That's harsh. Rape to death is an atrocity.
Yes.
God. Harsh is tooth pain, right? Or a backache, or being scolded by a parent or even a friend. Yeah, it's like, well, that's harsh. Like, no, having your friend or wife, or in this case, concubine, sexually assaulted to death is a couple steps above harsh.
I mean, is he going to talk about how she got in that position?
No.
Okay.
He doesn't.
That's sort of a key point here.
Right. And he doesn't talk about what happens to her body afterward, which is interesting because we can get on this now because he's
wait. John, I don't think we're supposed to talk. We're atheists and skeptics. We're not supposed to know the context. So.
And we have no standard by which
to hide it. Yeah, right.
That's right. Yeah. So so he goes into this, and this is when he gets into like the battle. So in Judges chapter 20, at this point, this guy it's a Levite. He has endured this thing from the previous chapter. Like the story is told in the previous chapter in Judges, but then he comes back after this horrible attack happens to his concubine, and he was in the land of Benjamin. He's back in I can't remember where he's, what land he's back in, but he's telling the Israelites, this is what happened, while we were there. these rowdy guys did this, and they raped my concubine until she died.
Whom I delivered to them. But
yeah, and what he does, and he does. I don't know if he even tells them that in the narrative.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the previous story, though, what happens is the Levite's traveling with a servant and his concubine, and he ends up in the land of Benjamin, whatever town he's in, Gibeah. And while he's there, it's weird because the story kind of mirrors.
It's a replay of
the Sodom and Gomorrah story. Yeah, and so he's there as a guest with this guy. They take him in, and these rowdy guys show up, and they want to rape the Levite, the man. And so the host offers his own daughter, and then the concubine of the guest to them. And I think they kind of insist on the Levite, but then eventually they take the women, and they have their way with her. She shows up, I think, the following morning, passed out on the doorstep. And when they try to rouse her, she can't awaken. She's passed away. She's dead. So the Levite, the quote unquote husband of this concubine, it's not his wife. And I've heard some Christians actually relate the story like, well, they horribly raped his wife, and that's his concubine, slightly different. He cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends each piece to one of the tribes.
Yep.
Then sets off to go back and then relate the tale. So, and he and the host insisted on sending her out along with the host's daughter to these guys to be ravished. When he turns around later on in the story and relates this, like, oh yeah, they took her and they raped her. Like, you gave her over to spare yourself. They wanted you. Yeah. You gave her up. And then when she was returned back to you dead, you carved her up and then sent her out as a message like, look what the Benjamites did to my property. That's essentially the claim.
But we won't tell them this background.
No, we can't do that because I need to justify myself and I need to look cool as a skeptic.
Now I don't feel as good about myself.
Okay.
That is terrible. That's horrific. Okay. Now,
I agree. That is horrific.
When you look down here, it says, I want you guys to see that the husband, he was seeking to get justice, but the Benjamites would not help. Yet it occurred on their territory. So for those of you who are following, I want you to turn to Judges chapter 20, and I want you to look at verse.
It's interesting too because it doesn't actually specify either in the previous chapter when the rowdy guys show up, or later on when he's relating it. It doesn't say that the group of men specific who they are. Right? They're just residents of Gibeah. So it's almost as if you're meant to assume that they are Benjamites. And so, they need to be turned over, right? That this is the responsibility of Benjamin to make sure these people are handed over for justice.
Verse 4. So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, my concubine and I went into Gibeah, that belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. So notice the man, the Levite, who was the husband of the woman, he went to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin to spend the night. And that's where his concubine was raped until she died. Do you see that? Now, was it God's will, Calvinist? Was it God's will for that woman to be raped? Was that God's will? No, it was not. No, it was not.
Well, so now he's going after Calvinists. So
which will?
Which one's will?
I was permissive will?
Yeah, we got to get into. Yeah, how many wills does this thing
his
have?
Decretive will? Like which?
Oh, do you know, like when it uses the phrase "the sons of Belial"? So that's the closest that we get to like an identification of the perverts that did this horrible attack. Does that have any kind of like real impact? Does that you know of
have any impact,
or does it really identify that these guys are something other than natives of Benjamin? Are they somehow kind of outliers who happen to be in Gibeah and they do this horrible thing?
No, I think they're just really, it's a way of saying they're bad. Hang on. What verse is that in?
20 verse 13. Yeah, it's hard to tell based on the I don't know which translation is used, but the sons of Belial. And that sounds like, these sons of bastards or sons of the devil or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it just So I'm looking at the Halot, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. So the word itself, Belial, is it's idiomatic. So as an adjective, good for nothing, useless, wickedness. So uselessness, wickedness, so sons of wickedness. But it just means like any of those phrases. The sons of X. It's a type of I don't even know. I'm trying to think of the word that I would use to describe it, but it's like the children of Israel are Israelites, right? The children of Benjamin are Benjamites. The children of Belial are like they're wicked people.
Yeah. Okay.
Wickedites.
Wickedites. Deadites. I kind of wonder about this too. Is it? I mean, because the translation that I have, because I have a New Revised Standard for the study Bible that I use, it's written out Benjaminites, not Benjamites. And I've seen it done both ways.
Yeah. So really, it's B'nai Binyamin, which would be Benjaminites, is what you would expect. The NIV renders it because of the N. The N gets like, I guess, assimilated, so they write it Benjamites.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, it does sound weird. You would expect it to be the Benjaminites. That's how I've always said it. But I think he's probably just got the NIV up there. I think most of the translations will say like the children of Benjamin or the sons of Benjamin.
Okay. Yeah.
But
because we're going to show why. We're going to show why it was not. Look at verse 13.
Oh, there it is.
Now, therefore, deliver up the men, the sons of Belial, who are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove the evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. Do you see that?
Now, he asked that. Do you see that? Yeah, you're showing it to me. I'm looking right at it.
I do.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because again, he kind of gets into this whole thing like, well, they have to do this. This is how they fulfill the covenant, and without that, I'm like, okay, all right. But it's not like God didn't kill the Benjaminites. He let the other Israelites kill them. He just kind of stood back and like, oh, well, street justice, God willing, you guys will sort it out. Remember, you get blessed if you happen to remove the evil from Israel. Keep looking for it. Keep killing until you get it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you succeed. Sorry. No, I'm just being a dick. But here he gets into God killed little boys. This is the Elisha story.
Now, let me just go over this quickly because I want you guys to see this, okay? I'm going to come back to that real quick. All right, so I want to do a quick recap, right?
What?
The Levite, he goes into Gibeah. That's on the territory of the Benjamites. His concubine is raped. She's raped so bad and for so long until she dies. So then he goes to the people to get justice, right? He goes there to get justice. And as he's telling them what happened, and as he's telling them to bring out the sons of Belial, right? Those men that did that wicked act, he's telling them, bring them out so that we can bring judgment on them and so that we can remove the evil from Israel. And you know what the response was from the Benjamites? They would not listen.
Nah, bro.
They would not listen.
Do you even live, bro?
I was happy with that.
It's just, nah, bro, no. But it just seems like at this point, like in the context of the story, like maybe Benjamin was spoiling for a fight. Yeah, they're like, oh yeah,
It's the book of Judges. Like this is what, like, I don't even know why we're talking about this outside of the fact that, trying to work out the semantic argument of whether God directly reached down from heaven and killed a bunch of people, or if he used people that he stirred up, to, like, I don't understand, because the book of Judges, it's there to say everybody was really fucked up. I mean, it's the whole point.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody did that which was right in his own eyes. So I'm like, they're wicked. The Israelites are wicked again and again and again. It's like this cyclical thing in the book of Judges, right? Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to tell everybody the background. I'm sorry about that,
no. Not from a scholarly perspective, anyway. Well, you need to get right with the theology first.
Get right, do right. You know what I'm saying? But there's a cycle in the book of Judges. So the people sin, right? They act rebellious or act wickedly against the Lord, and the Lord sends punishments in accordance with Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. Well, the people cry out under their punishment, and God has mercy on them, raises up a judge, and the judge comes and delivers them from the hand of their oppressors. And then it's good for a little while, and then after a period of time, the people forget, and boom, they start sinning again. It's this amazingly awful cycle that you see happening over and over again. So when people go to the book of Judges, sometimes I think the first thing I want to say is, well, let's think about the context. What is the book of Judges? What's the setting here? But yeah. Anyway.
No, he was not. This is why God allowed the Benjamites to be judged in the next chapter. God does not decree evil. It is evil to say that God decrees evil. God does not decree evil.
When those
evil, Benjamites...
Yeah,
what's he mean by evil?
Yeah, this is one of those things where you'd have to get him into a philosophical discussion about natural evil versus moral evil, and if God's omniscient, does natural evil even apply to a being like that, et cetera, et cetera. But like, even before you get into that, the idea of like kind of unpacking basically but two words. He doesn't decree evil. Like, well, yeah, if evil's a tragedy, he does. Right, because I mean, he decreed a flood. He ordained the flood to happen, and that happened. Right, so in terms of like natural evil, if it's a natural disaster kind of thing, then that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with him that if we're saying that God doesn't do morally incorrect things, right, morally wrong things by his, well, I mean. Let me say it a different way. The way the text presents him, the way the text is the writers of the text are trying to present him, is that God is perfect, right? God is righteous. God is just.
Yeah.
I think you can and should make the argument that there are lots of things that God commands that seem to go against his, things that he commands other people not to do. I don't know. But yeah. People. Maybe he's still arguing against the Calvinists, though.
Yeah, at this point,
maybe
and that was the first time he kind of said, "Oh yeah, Calvinist." Like, I thought it was kind of weird, but I don't know, maybe like he's 48 minutes in, 45 minutes in, and it's sort of like it's not angry atheists he's talking about now. It's it's doctrinally wrong Christians that he's pointing out now. Like, oh yeah, Calvinists, you can take.
I keep thinking he's the angry one. But I got to remember that you're at 1.5 speed, so maybe he's just not that. Maybe it just sounds that way because he's speaking quickly.
Yeah. I think at normal speed, he's kind of enthusiastic. But yeah, he seems a little clipped, so it makes him seem a little. But like even when he's not, when he says things like, "Do you see that? Do you understand?" He keeps asking that question. It's like, okay, that's a little condescending to.
Oh, condescending. Ease up. Whoa, buddy.
Would not do justice, and they would not bring out those men that raped that woman. When those Benjamites refused to do that, in the next chapter, God allows those Benjamites to be judged. Not just the ones that committed the crime, but the entire Benjamites. Why? Because they turned a blind eye to justice. Are you listening?
Are you listening? What he fails to get into, because he wraps this up, what he fails to get into is the actual part where the justice, quote unquote, happens. So the Israelites, the Benjamites basically send some people out and they're ready for a fight. The Israelites send their men to get into a fight, and you get into this kind of classic like 3-stage kind of thing in some Bible stories. Sorry, but the first attack does not go well for the Israelites. A bunch of them are killed by the Benjaminites, right? So God's allowing some of these Israelites to die in this holy quest for justice. So they go back to this, and here's the thing. They'd started out at a place, it sounds like it's a temple. They go there, they kind of consecrate their efforts before the Lord, pray for victory in the fight. They amass on their battle line. Benjaminites and the Israelites have it out. Israelites lose. They go back weeping and praying to God. They make even more propitiations, sacrifices. Round 2. They go right back to the battlefield, square up against the Benjaminites. Benjaminites hand them their asses again. They go back weeping and crying and praying to God, and they offer up even more propitiations. And then round 3 happens. Now, round 3, it sounds like, and usually these things always seem to come in threes. Round 3 is where it's going to turn out good for the Israelites. They set up people in an ambush. They square up against the Benjaminites in the same fashion, but they've sent out another group to get ready for an ambush. They begin to fight with the Benjaminites. They retreat, lure the Benjaminites in, and then they get ambushed. And then some of this ambush party invades the city and then sets it ablaze. This distracts the Benjaminite army, divides them, and the Israelites prevail. That's the entire narrative. So when this guy's like, well, hey, the Benjaminites did this bad thing and they wouldn't owe up to it, so God allows the Israelites to judge them. Yeah, that whole narrative raises some questions. If the Israelites were justified in squaring up against the Benjaminites, why didn't God deliver the Benjaminites unto them in the first round? He allowed a bunch of Israelites who were on the just side to die. And their losses were big. They lost quite a few people. So that's something I would bring up to him. But I'm just an angry atheist. I don't understand biblical language. So
you're going to tell me that God doesn't care about justice? You're going to tell me that God is an author of evil? No. I don't know what God you serve, but the John Calvin understanding of God is distorted. It is not the God of the Bible. I said it is not the God of the Bible.
He did say that.
He's throwing down. He is throwing down with the Calvinists. I'm not on camera, so I can't. I'm doing the sign of the cross for him. Vaya con Dios, buddy. Calvinists are that's a tricky group if you want to fight them. But yeah, go ahead.
God is a God of love, and God is a God of justice.
The Calvinists believe both those things. So I think that's pretty much it. Because after the okay.
Oh yeah, he talks about the kids now, right? We gotta at least talk about the kids.
Wow, that's another. I wonder what he talks about for this gap. All right, well let's just get into this. This confused me because when he starts talking about it, he kind of takes some things out of context. But I mean, I'm taking things out of context because I'm an atheist. I'm just not hearing everything.
People in the body of Christ to be equipped, right? So this is not for my ego. This is for the body of Christ. Hit the like button so that more of them can hear the word and become equipped. Hit the like button.
It's funny how, this isn't for my ego, but it's to benefit the body of the Christ. It's always funny to me that those two go really hand in hand.
But glory to God. All right. So here is 2 Kings 2:23-24. Then he went up from there to Bethel. And as he was going up the road, now your King James is going to say, I believe, children. Now, this is where the importance of
those morons.
Those moron scholars.
To clarify for the audience watching this is then when he went up from there to Bethel. So a couple things to keep in context here. So two big prophets, Elijah and Elisha. This is Elisha that he's talking about, and this has happened after Elijah has gone up in the whirlwind in the chariot, and basically kind of like pass the torch, so to speak, onto Elisha.
You got to stop giving all this backdrop. You're an atheist. God, didn't you read his slide? You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah,
you don't want them to know.
If any, yeah, I should have putting this language into context. An atheist explains. Yeah, I'm going to get some downvotes for that. Thanks, Dr. Josh.
Sorry.
That's all right. All of it strokes the algorithm, so it's all good. It all balances out. But yeah, so now he's taken on the King James. Obviously, those idiots couldn't get the translation
and
right.
All the other translators. They're just dumb. They don't know why they're doing it.
But and you didn't make it anywhere near this part, right, Dr. Josh?
No.
Okay, so yeah,
I'm super excited.
Okay, let's get through this.
So going to the scriptures is important. The Hebrew term here, na'ar, it can mean in some context children. That's true. However, the Hebrew word can also mean young men. You have to let the context tell you whether it's little boys or young men, right? So
can you do me a favor?
Sure.
I can't believe we're doing this, but can you bring up, actually, Should I share my? Yeah. What is it? The app that everybody always brings up? I don't know what these online apps are, but the one that
I usually just Google. I'll Google the chapter, and then it's either Bible Gateway or Biblia.
Can you do that? Can you bring this verse up? Because I want to show you something that is strange.
For whatever reason, I don't know why I can't share more than one screen. I'd have to stop this one and share it. Do you want to share yours? I can let you share yours.
Yeah, let's see. I can try to do that. Let's see.
Because it should pop up here, and then all I got to do is just like bring it up. It might actually kind of like, well, it shouldn't change anything. Add to stream. Okay, there it is.
There we go. Okay. So this is BibleWorks. This is, and that's very small. Well, anyway, so here's the verse. And he went up from there. I hate that pop-up. How do you get rid of that pop-up? Anyway, to Bethel, and going up in the way were Ne'arim Ktanim. This is a word that he's not mentioning for some reason. So if you look, you can't see that, can you?
I have a small laptop screen, so for me, I can't really make it out. For other people watching, I think they can blow it up. I don't know how to actually expand it or to zoom in on it.
That little pop-up there, Katan,
yeah.
Small, young. That's the adjective with the word na'ar or na'ar.
So he's focused on the noun, but he's leaving out an adjective.
There's an adjective along with it, and like if you look in the lexicon browser, so here's Halot. Now here's your citation. So it's small, meaning young, right? So here are the other verses that go along with it. So, for example, this is Na'arak Tana, which is the female version of it. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl, Na'arak Tana, from the land of Israel. Anyway, but the word katan means small in modern Hebrew too. That's what it means. But so it's not just na'ar. He's right. Na'ar normally means like a little kid.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a range. It's like the word yeled. Yeled can, I mean, I haven't done any systematic research on either of those words, but sorry. I think it's important to recognize that he's just got the word na'ar there, but it also has the adjective katan with it, which means young.
Yeah.
So,
and the interesting thing is he gets into an interesting story here, but I looked this up in the study Bible but also the Hebrew study Bible. The Hebrew study Bible translation, it just says little boys, little children. Right. That's all it says. So the translators for that had no problem saying no, they're referring to kids.
Yeah.
So yeah. But then again, clearly they don't have it right.
They're dumb.
It's the Hebrew study Bible. Clearly they don't know anything about Hebrew language. So
there to Bethel, and as he was going up the road, some young men came from the city and mocked him, saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" Now, why are they saying "go up"? Because they're mocking him. Because Elijah has already went up in a whirlwind. So when they're telling him go up," they're basically mocking him as well as letting him know that they do not want his presence there. Now, he turned around and looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the young men. Now, I want to show you guys from scripture that this Hebrew term can refer to young men. Okay? Look at this here. It was the young men who fought for Abraham in Genesis 14:24. The same Hebrew term, na'ar.
Does it say na'ar katan?
Yeah. So it's almost like a word that could mean youth. You could have youth, and that could be somebody at mid to late teens would be a youth, right?
Let's just look. 14:24. Nope. just ne'arim. There's no word little, young there. No
So
adjective.
so really it's this. If he's trying to say that this is some kind of correlation to what's going on in verses 23 through 24 of 2 Kings, he's taking this out of context.
Well, he's just not. It's not ne'arim. It's ne'arim katanim. It's not just youths. It's little or young youths.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a reason the adjective is there.
He brings up Absalom was a young man in 2 Samuel 18:5. My guess is that's probably Na'arim too.
Let's see. Yeah, la na'ar, la avshalom. Yeah, it's just to the na'ar. It's not the na'ar katan.
Yeah,
I'm interested, and now I want to go back and look and see how the Septuagint translates it in 2 Kings 2. First was it 23? Sorry, we can keep going up.
His background does kind of hurt my eyes. That hot pink is a little tough. The weird thing is on my monitor, part of my monitor is a little on the fritz. I've got to get a replacement computer. But when I have two screens up like this, kind of two tabs, and I'm sharing it, it flickers. So it's this hot pink strobe kind of going on. So I kind of have to look away, just listen. Really.
So this has paidarion, so paidaria for like children, and then mikra from mikras, small or little. So it's little children.
So even if you want to, if you want to refer back to the Greek Septuagint, even they
anyway,
they emphasize it. So anyway, I think at that point, then we don't really need to listen to any more of this. The only thing that I would point out though is that he gets into more of this thing where he's like, the kids knew about Elijah, and that's why they're telling him, go up, you bald head, go up, you bald headed. There's nothing in there that indicates that those kids are aware of Elijah's ascent. There's nothing about that. And when it's translated in the Hebrew Study Bible, it's not go up, you bald head. It's go away, baldy.
Go. I mean, I would assume it's from Allah.
Yeah, it's like go away, get out of here. Yeah, that's how it's translated in Hebrew Study Bible, not go up. So I think he's like reading into this translation and saying, oh, go up. Oh, like his boss did, like Elijah did. So they know about that. Like, no, any commentary or notes I've read on this particular passage, it doesn't.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. I mean, it's interesting. That's something I'd want to go back and read through the text and see if there's a literary play there.
Yeah, and I mean, just based on what I've seen, I haven't been able to find any scholarly notes where they've looked at it that way. So I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know where he's getting that from, and he doesn't support that take on it. He's just sort of like throwing that out there, and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit different than what.
I mean, I think it like I don't think there's any problem with that interpretation. I mean, as far as like literary consistency or something, that would be problematic. I haven't thought about it.
I think it would change the emphasis if you've got a group of kids that are like this, that are aware of his role, because that makes them. They're not just insulting a bald guy like their elder, right? I think he's trying to say like these kids are definitely aware that he's a prophet, and they're
rejecting a prophet.
They're rejecting a prophet. So
I'd be interested to.
It's like, okay, maybe, but I don't know if that's necessarily conveyed in the language being, but who knows? Who knows? Maybe it is. So yeah, that was a new one for me. But other than that, yeah, I think the fact that he's kind of doing the same thing, like
this is why, and I've said this before, this sort of thing on the one hand is really admirable. Like I'm really excited to see people do this, this sort of thing. So like pulling up the Hebrew, pulling up the Greek, and trying to wrestle with it. Where it goes awry, and where I would say like pump the brakes, is when you start to think to yourself, I, as apparently an untrained person in this language, right? Because that's what I'm picking up from him, that he's not trained in the language. Because I have this online app,
yeah,
I am now better suited to translate this then all of the scholars that have come before me and are doing it right now, right? I know better than they do. And there's just some hubris there that we need to just simmer down now. Just simmer down now, right?
Sit down before you fall down. So yeah, I think we can probably wrap it up there. I don't think there's much else. He kind of beats this into the ground. He goes into, what does he notice the contrast? Oh, he gets into Ezekiel, I think, and gets back more into the covenant. He then kind of goes into to be without God is a curse, etc., etc. I think he gets into this weird. Also, I want to point this out too, because the phrase that he's got on here, like the part where he it's the pictures of like, I think is it the thinking atheist?
I'm not
you have no protection without God.
It's not important, but it's like Aaron Rod, Dan Burton, and Dan Barton, genetically modified skeptic, and another guy, and I can't remember his name. But it's like, that's kind of a weird grab bag of quote unquote angry atheists that he picked out, because I wouldn't describe Dan Barton or genetically modified skeptic as being angry atheists. Like Aaron Rod, I've seen him get plenty triggered. He probably doesn't mind being called an angry atheist.
Right.
So then he goes on for about about 20 minutes, about 10 minutes, and kind of throws Calvinists under the bus. So we can probably stop it here.
That,
we can end it here. But yeah, those are basically the key points we kind of want to pick up on, because the whole point of his thing was like, well, you need to understand biblical language, you angry atheists, even though that's not exactly how he wrote his title. So it's like, okay, all right, well, how do you understand biblical language? And I think it's kind of weird that if you want to get into like some of the ways he presented the stuff, it's like, if you're going to present like Hebrew vocabulary in a way to kind of like justify your take on it, it might help if you present the narratives that you're talking about in their full context, not just see this section here. Well, it supports my idea that,
and it would be wise to just go like, just go pull a commentary off the shelf. Pull a reputable commentary off the shelf and see what they say about it. Because like that one, if you just pulled the 2 Kings 2 off the shelf, you would see, I'm sure if I just went and pulled one of my commentaries on 2 Kings off the shelf right now, it would say Ne'arim Katanim. So it would talk just for a second at least about, who are they? And are these young men or these little boys? If that's controversial, it's just worth your time, because it keeps you from going because I'm sure that it took him some time to go track down those verses and try to build that argument. It's for naught, right? Because it doesn't have if you don't recognize that the word little or young comes after the noun that you're searching on, then if you find that noun elsewhere, like this is a little house. Well, we don't know that it's a small house, because look, here's a context over here where it says, and here's a house, and that one's clearly big. And here's another context where the word house is used, and that one's not small. And it's like, yeah, but it says little house in this one. It doesn't just say house. It says, so that's important. But I mean, just final thoughts then. Like, I think this is an important thing to keep in mind. I would encourage anybody that's interested in this topic, again, go read. I think it's available online to download, or it's on Academia or something. But Jeffrey Tigay, Tigay, wrote an article, again, I think it's 2018 or 17, and it's on this permissive, tolerative, whatever, use of the HIFL and the PL. And I think that's an important thing to look at. And it can be useful in certain contexts, because it can give you a slightly better nuance on these passages, if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Right.
And it's good to keep those sorts of things in mind when you read through the text. But again, I don't know that it's the right thing again, you don't want to treat that as like a kid with a hammer.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is not a nail. So not every time you see a Hifil is that permissive. Not every time you see a PL is that permissive, right? And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. Again, I think that the article that Tigay cites, or the study, the systematic study that was done on the use of the Hifil and the PL, I think they cite 44 examples of the Hifil that have this permissive in the Hebrew Bible. 44.
Wow. Okay.
It's not like it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty rare.
So I was going to say, since we're kind of wrapping things up, I wanted to point out, if anybody's interested in getting into more, and I'll throw this up there if Dr. Josh has some statements on this. I found this from its publisher. This is a book I picked up because I'm about to start trying to get into a little bit of more broad kind of comprehensive study of the Old Testament. It is this one, Introduction to the Hebrew Bible by John J. Collins. I'm
phenomenal.
I'm reading his book on biblical ethics, the one, and you can go, if in fact, since we're putting this on there, I'll probably share the link to your interviews with John J. Collins in the description. Really cool interviews. He's he seems like a really cool guy, very funny.
He really is amazing.
His scholarship is fantastic. I feel like watching Resurrected Eyes video here, I went back and reread the prologue, the forward to his book on biblical ethics. And I feel like if just that section was read by more YouTube apologists, they would maybe kind of pause, take a little bit of an inventory about where they're going to go with what they say next. And some of it they won't. There'll be some that'll just be like, John J. Collins is just a liberal scholar. We can just reject.
He's that liberal Christian.
But if you have an opportunity, there's other good textbooks out that are introductions to either the Bible entirely. I wanted something that was kind of an introduction to Hebrew Bible with a little bit more emphasis on kind of like cultural stuff. This one's really good because it's got a huge opening about ancient Near Eastern, a big overview kind of survey of ancient Near Eastern history in general. And it's actually cheap. As far as textbooks go, this one's actually a little bit less expensive. There's one out there's like $110, and I think it's from the same people that do the Oxford Annotated Study Bible. And it's like 110 or 120 to get like a more recent copy of that. Both are good, if you're interested in them. But I really like John J. Collins, what I read from before. And then when I realized he had this book, I was like, oh, yep, I'm buying that. So it's sitting on my shelf now, waiting to be read. So that's going to be. And
Dozeman, I don't think I can post something in the chat, but Dozeman, Dozeman, has, I think it's 2010, an introduction to the Pentateuch in particular. And it looks very daunting because it's very thick. He's made the print bigger. But if you're interested in the documentary hypothesis and not just the documentary hypothesis, but the debate, the history of how it came to be, who all the players are. If you're looking for a really great background into where scholarship is today, that's the place. I think he's got 115 pages on it, where he just goes through from the beginning. And here's why Ostrich came to this conclusion, and here's Wellhausen, and here, and all the way down to that's it. It's a phenomenal book, and of course Dozeman's a very good scholar. So
if anybody's interested in that one's actually through the same one, Fortress Press. So if you're interested in that, take a look at it. But if you're otherwise, like New Testament stuff, I would recommend the textbook that I got, but it's from Bart Ehrman, so that's always controversial. But if it's Old Testament stuff, I picked up that John J. Collins ones, but there are a couple new ones, and there's other good stuff out there.
There's this new book coming out. I don't know much about the author, but it's called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament.
I was going to get into that. I was going to plug that one next.
they've got a whoever's publishing it, whatever weird publishing house is putting it out.
It's named after some Babylonian. It was pagan, so I just overlooked it.
But it's they've got a preview out now where you got like the table of contents and then the acknowledgments and a couple parts of the introduction and bibliography. But that's on their website. It's Digital Hammurabi. That's what it is. digitalhammurabi.com.
That's more 21st century liberal scholarship.
Yeah, that's right. You can't really trust it. Can't really trust it.
I'm trying to pull up that link too, because I was going to highlight that on here. But go to Digital Hammurabi's website. You can find that and take a look at that, because I think you got 52 pages on there. The first 52.
Yeah. Oh, I think she put the entire bibliography in there just so you could see it. But
perfect. Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, and the one thing I only recommend the John J. Collins ones for now. Like if you want to do a really deep dive, I think the thing that I'm looking forward to the most for your book, shameless plug, is that I'm looking forward to the bibliography. That's one of the reasons I like, even though I don't always, people are critical of like Bart Ehrman's take on certain things, but scholars will argue. But his bibliographies for most of his, even like his kind of like more focused texts for general readers, his bibliographies are really good.
And there's a bibliography that I waited for was when John Golden Gay put out his recent 2019 commentary on Daniel, the updated commentary on Daniel in the God, am I blanking on the name? The Word Biblical Commentary series. Like that bibliography is immense. And of course it's very recent, it's up to date. So if you're interested in stuff on the book of Daniel, you want to read about the 70 weeks, what's everybody written on it, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that's let me see here.
And it's a great commentary. And I think he's an evangelical. Yeah, there it is.
The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Joshua Bowen, Volume 1. There'll be a Volume 2 at some point.
There will be a Volume 2.
But yeah, the sneak preview is pretty good. Read that if you're interested in it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. And you're thinking what, June?
June 1st is what we're shooting for. Megan just finished her final edits. I think what she's doing now is going through the bibliography and making sure I didn't fuck it up. She's checking each citation to make sure that I have it in the bibliography, but I think she's almost done with it.
Okay. Yeah, great.
So what we're going to do, just so everybody knows, we're going to send off for like a printed copy so that we can physically look through it before we actually let it go live. But we have all 3 recommendations. I'm really excited about them. We have a recommendation from Francesca Stavrakopoulou.
Sweet.
We have one from Joel Baden, and we have one from Aaron Ra.
Oh, nice.
So I think it's a good mix.
Yeah, I'll be going through the sneak preview here pretty soon. And then, yeah, I was going to ask you, since you want to plug anything that you got coming up anytime?
We're right in the middle of the Humans Against Poor Scholarship application interviews. So if you haven't become a patron yet, or you haven't donated one time to the nonprofit, it's a nonprofit, so you get to write it off. If you contribute once, you get a vote. So you watch the interviews and you say I like that scholar and that scholar and that scholar. I think we can give away 4 scholarships this year.
Oh, nice.
So it's total $8,000. So Megan's working very hard on it. So as is the rest of the HAPS board. So yeah, they're doing great work. So yeah, definitely tune in and check that out.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I didn't get to see that one because I was setting up for this, but yeah, I need to go back and take a look at those. So I should be having a live stream tomorrow. I'm going to stick around here for anybody who's interested, because we still got 21 people viewing. I was going to post the StreamYard link in here, and then I might stay live for it, but I might just post it. If people want to come in and ask questions or anything. I didn't know, Dr. Jess, I don't know if you want to stick around because we're already about 2 hours.
I can hang out for a little while. I think Megan and Oliver are still napping, so I can, if people have questions for me,
okay,
I'll do that. Come in, I can hang out for at least a few minutes.
I'll do that right now. So if anybody's got questions, I'm going to post the link right now. Let me see.
Or if Jay wants to come in and tell me what his ultimate grounding for the foundation of concrete particulars, the ultimate universal.
He has been ducking you, yeah.
Or is he just going to prevaricate?
Yeah, run, coward. Okay, so I've pinned that on there. That should be up there.
I need to stop doing that, because the reality is, I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, so I'm just having fun with the way he approaches people.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have good arguments against what he's saying, because it's not really my thing.
Yeah, if you're not even, do you watch many of those at all?
I've been watching a few more recently, but again, it's more just because it's cringeworthy.
If I could recommend one, Tom Rabbit's, the one that he did, it's only about 12, 13 minutes long, but it's Dr. Stephen Law, because I think he is an analytical philosopher. So
I like that guy.
Yeah, that's his area of expertise, and the way he kind of deals with some of the questions from Darth, it's starting to actually catch on. More and more people are like, "Wait a minute, I don't know what those words mean. Why don't you try and tell me what those words mean?" kind of thing. But it's a great kind of encapsulation of like everything Darth Dawkins, and like a good response from like a philosopher with a PhD who kind of deals with those arguments is just kind of like, yeah, I don't know.
I haven't. Wait, I got to interrupt here because Dr. Josh called me out. So this is all I got for you.
Do not overtalk me. Do not overtalk me.
These nuts were prevaricating on your chin.
That's a non-answer to my question. Do you need me to ask you the question again, Jay? What is the ultimate? I'll ask it again. This will be the sixth time.
I asked you a question. These
nuts are the absolute ultimate.
That's one that I heard.
Impossible on your chin.
Jim Majors actually said that. You guys probably all know that, but he actually said that at one point in one of their debates. He said, "My right nut is what is ultimate."
Oh, he's done that before. I did that on my stream a couple nights ago. I've been drinking a little beer, and I think Jill was in there. Jill was in my live chat. Praise John Maddox, logical, possible, probable, and enigma conjecture. And if they were saying something like "smart ass," I would basically just respond with these nuts comments.
Yeah, I would give them a mind twister, like, what's ultimate in your worldview? Like, each of my testicles is more absolute than the other.
Well, I was
just like Chuck Norris, it's just like Chuck Norris's balls.
Yeah, I made the mistake of earlier that day. I watched the skit twice. It was a Key and Peele skit about these nuts, where Jordan Peele plays this guy, and that every time somebody tells him something, these nuts were doing something. These nuts were, yeah.
These nuts. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions for Dr. Josh while he's here for a little bit longer, throw them up in the chat if you want, or I shouldn't say throw up, but yeah, post them up in the live chat. I was gonna say go ham, guys. I think we got his book plugged, which is good. That's coming out in June. I'm looking forward to that. Everything else. And I wanted to say thanks again, Dr. Josh, for finding this thing.
I actually think he's got more up because I checked it before we went live, and I think that was just one of them.
Oh, does he have part 2 up now?
I think, and maybe even a part 3. And I'm not sure.
Oh, he's been busy. Oh. Well, now I'm going to have to
have fun.
You guys do know that this is Jesus's Lord bait, right? Jill's gonna watch this, and he's gonna be like, oh, "There's that. I've refuted Dr. Josh on this so many times."
Well, he's destroyed me so many times.
I know.
That
actually, Resurrected Eyes is live now, and he's talking about and in the picture for the one he's got live on the left side is Pine Creek. It's does Bible support rape, killing babies? How not to read the Bible? Left hand side Pine Creek, right hand side Skylar Fiction. So yeah.
Oh, is that the one? Wait, is he going to get into the whole if a man seizes a woman that's not betrothed? Blah blah blah.
22.
I don't. Yeah, that's in Deuteronomy. Yeah, I was thinking Deuteronomy 23 for some reason, but yeah, it's Deuteronomy 22. But that one's. And when they say, "No, that's not what seize means," I'm like, actually, if you read before,
it does.
If you read everything, the seize means the same thing as like when a man seizes a woman that is betrothed. Yeah,
so it's like, a different. There's no question that in chapter 22, during the uncontested rape law, that I think the word achaz is used there in the Hithil to seize, right? And so the word that's used in 28 and 29, I think, is tafas. And so people make a big deal out of that. That tafas is like a softer grabbing,
softer grabbing.
But I mean, like if you just search on the root tafas, the verb tafas, and pull it up in a bunch of different contexts, and you'll see like, go capture those men, go tafas them. We have captured these captives, tafas. Like, seize him, tafas. It's anyway.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny when they focus just on that one, they miss the ones before, and it's like, no, the same. I think I'm pretty sure that's the same seize in this one where the guy gets killed if he rapes a betrothed woman. yeah. Anyway.
Well, I just want to point out that so it looks like he did do. I mean, maybe this is something of a follow up, but about 19 hours ago, Resurrected Eyes did a video called "Pharaoh's Heart Hardened: Understanding Biblical Language." Oh, that's part 2, but it's just it's only 20 minutes long, so it's not so yeah, it's just kind of an addendum. And then he's got the one going on. Does Bible support rape, killing babies? It wouldn't be the Bible anyway. So like, he's got 4 watching.
Does it support?
Does the Bible support rape? Yeah, that's kind of I don't
know if you guys heard, but Megan and Oliver just woke up. So does anybody have any last questions for me? Because I probably have to go.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take this off air anyway. So if we're gonna hang out, we'll probably just do this offline.
Yeah.
For any other questions or anything, but yeah, we can wrap this up.
I think you guys have covered just about anything. I can't think of anything. You guys covered and plugged just about everything you can. So.
Yeah, well, I don't like these to push too much further than 2 hours, and we're at about 2:20, so that's perfect. So,
well, thank you guys very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know about this video, and thanks for coming on to talk about it with me. So,
no problem.
You'll probably be a little bit more later. Like, I'd send this to Spatchcock, but then he'll ask me to show up.
I'll have to go on and talk about it.
Yeah, let me know sometime if you do just escalate it to the Spatchcock clan file. Like, yeah, I heard some things that were a little weird. Deal with that for me.
Deal with it.
I'll accept that, and we'll just go. We'll give you a nod. Like, yeah, we regret to inform everyone Dr. Bowen can't be with us to do this, so we're gonna dunk on this person hard.
He's gotten burned out from talking about slavery so much. We decided that just fuck it.
He basically created a subsidiary that we managed to deal with slavery claims in the Bible.
Here's my question: why can't we agree on the fucking topic? The Bible has slavery in it. Okay, whether it was ordained by God, who gives a shit at this point? It's in there.
They do.
Well, they do.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Again, thanks to Dr. Josh for being a special guest today. Everybody, thank you for showing up and watching. Do the normal stuff you're supposed to do with YouTube channels, I guess. Like if you'd like, hate if you don't like it, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Anyway, take it easy. I'm going to be posting links for some of these other videos and to Digital Hammurabi in the description later.
Thank you.
When I get around to it. So
subscribe
go check out
or die.
Yeah, subscribe or die. Don't subscribe to me because my opinions are too controversial. I don't want to be removed by the YouTube Illuminati.
And please go back to actually hear all of that in context because we were playing on something that Jill says on his channel.
Yes, those are all Jill-isms. But yeah, go take a look at Digital Hammurabi, and you can actually follow him and Megan on Twitter too. So I'll try to put those up as well.
Thank you.
So, see you later, guys.
All right, guys. See ya.
Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.